Jennifer was kind enough to help, jump in and get us a static screen with some basic information here. But nonetheless, we're going to get some good information over to you. I think we are open on the chat for some questions. If we do not see any questions come through or responses, then what we will do is ask that you send any questions you have to support@americaniv.com. That is support@americaniv.com. And submit your questions there, and they will get to me, and I will provide as much information and answer as I can before we need to go further with that. So with that, thank you for having me, the American IV Association. It's always enjoyable to come and speak to members here and attendees as you embark on either opening or exploring to open or adding new services to your IV clinic. The point of today's webinar is really to expose you to different sources of liability in IV clinics. It seems like there's sometimes one, right, patients, but sometimes there's some hidden issues. And when we talk about liability, we want to really think about anything that can hurt your business. Part of our goal at the Florida Healthcare Law Firm and as lawyers and through the American IV Association is to really help take you from either a place of this being your first foray into business, or if you're seasoned, and this is a new add-on service for you, or a new type of business in general. What types of things do you need to be aware of in the healthcare space, in the IV space, that can hurt you and hurt your business? And I mean that from a liability standpoint, regulatory compliance, financial, and legal, and of course personally, as you're an owner or operator, you want to make sure you're protected as well. So let's talk about the various sources of liability. We're going to talk about how to spot them. We're going to talk about contracting around them, how to address them when they hit, and we want you to leave here with information that is at least enough of a start so you can address those issues, put in place and execute plans of action, and then understand where you can find different tools and resources to identify those issues early on and try to prevent them or at least be prepared for them. So various sources of liability. In a IV clinic, you are dealing with different parties. You're dealing with employees or contractors. You're dealing with patients. You're dealing with vendors, and you're dealing with regulatory bodies. So let's start first with employees or contractors. Those are the people that you hire to help, run and operate your business. You've got to deal with the, various state and federal employment laws that apply to a business of your size. In some states and in some cases, because you're under X number of employees, most employment laws are not going to apply. But in general, employees still have rights, and you want to make sure that you're, complying with those rights and not doing things that are going to expose you to what typically turns out to be significant employment law issues. So, for example, how you terminate an employee, that can be a source of liability. Are you doing it based upon a contract? Are you following the terms of that contract? Are you doing it without a contract and you're just basing it upon the fact that you're in a state that provides for at-will employment? Still, how are you documenting that termination? Many issues that we see today with employees really focus on wrongful termination. They focus on competition and solicitation, and they focus on underpayment, mispayment of wages, meaning did you did you not pay someone in the way that you're supposed to pay them? One example that I've seen in the past is, language in a contract wasn't clear, and it wasn't clear if the amount that was to be paid should have been an annual amount paid on a biweekly basis, or was it a single amount that was paid weekly or biweekly. It just wasn't clear. And so when the employer was going to terminate this person, we had to really work with them to try to come up with the best solution of what we thought they meant, look at other communications, and then advise from there, and maybe even offer settlement to say, hey, here's what we think you should do, because here's the risk if you do it wrong. We ran the risk, and the client ran the risk of saying, I'm only going to pay you X, and maybe the contract kind of implies that they should be paid Y. And if you underpay, that can mean, damages that are multiplied, by, 2 or 3 times what should have been paid, plus penalties that come from the state, to deal with the underpayment. So that's just one example. Employee wages, also termination. You have to give employees the appropriate amount of notice as either required by law, and sometimes there's no notice, or required by contract. So if you go the route of contracting your employees, you want to make sure that you understand how you can terminate them, that you have the flexibility you need, and that you terminate them in accordance with the contract, whether it's by giving them a certain amount of notice, providing them with certain, severance or benefits at the end of termination, whatever it may be. And then, lastly, it's really about how do you enforce appropriately any sort of restrictions that you want to put on those employees after. You need to make sure that you didn't do anything to violate the contract, which might void any non-compete or non-solicitation. And you need to make sure that when you do have those terms in a contract, if someone is violating them post-termination, you want to enforce them, because if you don't enforce them, then that tells the next person that they can step all over you, and you don't want to waive any rights that you have under a contract. So employees are a large source of liability. And how do you address them? Well, contracting them clearly early on, having a process and a method for hiring, disciplining, and firing employees, having written protocols on how to do that, and then following it. And then, how do you spot them? Well, I think with most people, it's hard. Sometimes, employees put on a facade of who they are really, and then, it turns out a few months later they show their true selves. So you just want to keep, an eye on their actions throughout and address things early on. And how do you address them? Like I said, you want to have protocols in place for addressing employee issues, whether it be a strike system that's, drafted out and, shared with the employee, whether it's just simply hey, we see this issue and we want to address it. There's 2 people in a room talking to you about it. You formally write it out to them. You let them know that they've done something that you don't like, that's either hurting the business in violation of the contract or otherwise. Give them written notice of it and say, we're putting this in your employee file and documenting the entire interaction. So that's how I would deal with employees. On the patient side, it becomes a little bit more difficult, because dealing with patients, you've got to be careful with patient privacy. You have to be careful with the fact that they're your paying customers, and the fact that they're likely going to leave you a review. Hopefully good, but if you have an issue with them, it's likely going to be bad. So spotting those issues early on, you're looking for a patient that complains of getting hurt, patient that gets injured, a patient that has any sort of issues with payment up front, a patient that has any issues signing documentation, or just looking at how they kind of interact in public and with your staff. You may see some things that tell you this person's going to be a little bit difficult. So you want to spot those early on, because patients will drive you nuts, and you'll feel, I think, responsible for wanting to make them as happy as possible because they ultimately pay your bills. But what sometimes I think, clients overlook is the fact that, it can be more stressful and more onerous to have, a patient like that around all the time that you're trying to constantly appease rather than just move on from them, right? Make them happy, and have them not be a patient anymore. So, we can do a lot of things to contract around those issues, right? So we want to have patient policies in place regarding, how they interact with you, how they schedule, how they reschedule, cancellation, how they pay, the type of payment authorization that you need, when they pay, your refund policies, different things that, they might be entitled to if you offer memberships or packages, right? So any way that you interact with a patient, you absolutely want to make sure that, there's a policy in place that's written, that they've seen prior to treatment, and that they've signed, and it goes into their record as well. Why? Because if something happens, whether it be cancellation, refund, injury, or otherwise, you need to make sure that you have documentation prior to them, going forward with that issue where you disclose things to them, they had a chance to read it, they signed it. Even when you have those things, though, patients are going to push forward. So how do you address them? Keep calm. Don't engage in back and forth on email, text, or otherwise. Call your lawyer and get some guidance on how to try to reason with them. Sometimes, you may be wrong, and it's a business decision of what you need to do financially to, make it right. Sometimes they're just, flat out nuts and they're crazy, and you're going to run into that in business. And you need to decide, is this something that in a couple of days will probably roll over and that'll be it? Or is this going to persist, and do I need to do something in addition, to get this to stop? Are there legal actions that I can actually take? Sometimes that might be a cease and desist for harassment. They could be interfering with your business. You might even have to call the local, authorities, cops, to get someone to stop coming into a clinic, because they're coming in and they're harassing other staff and clients. So, patients can be difficult, but I think you have to keep in the back of your mind that, one patient doesn't make or break, your business. Well, in fact, it doesn't make it, but it could break it, right? So, figure out where you want to use your energy, and where you want to focus it. And then similar to the employment world, having protocols for dealing with certain issues that the staff understands. So there's a very clear and dedicated way of dealing with refunds, cancellations, non-payment issues, things like that. And your staff is trained as well. So there's no, chink in the armor and break in the chain. Everybody knows how to deal with patients. Everybody knows how to deal with the common issues there. From a regulatory and compliance perspective, there's so many different things on so many different levels that from a regulatory perspective, could affect your business. Scope of practice, appropriate supervision, appropriate ordering, licensure. All of those things are things that, early on, I don't know if it's spotting them or understanding what you need to do in order to properly comply with, the laws of your state in order to operate your IV business. That's where, either your own research or lawyer research comes into play. Identify how you're going to operate, where you're going to operate, and then that's going to dictate, who can do what type of supervision, what type of licensure is appropriate. If you're compounding, then, what you need to know about, compounding and sterile compounding, what additional licensure you might need. All of those things are things that you want to find out early on. Doing legal research and spending the time to make sure that you know what you have there, because there's no contracting around it. You can certainly ask for forgiveness, but at times that means your provider license is now under investigation, And that could be obviously very stressful, and that could really impact your business and your operations and how you operate. So I think you want to do a lot of that work up front. And then, if an issue arises and comes up, that's where you want to really take it seriously, read what the, letter you received might say, see if there's deadlines on it to comply with certain response requirements or otherwise, or if you're supposed to appear for something. You want to take those seriously. Those are not something that you want to wait till, 2 days before and then decide, let me hire someone to get some insight on this. I think you want to engage somebody who understands, Board of Nursing or Department of Health, complaints and investigations, because usually you're only given, 20 to 30 days to really review and respond to those things. And I don't know if the regulatory bodies just hope that they get you, but that's a very short amount of time when you're, faced first into your business, and there's deadlines to comply with responding, and if you're going to hire a lawyer to help you with it, you got to plan on the fact that they have other things going on as well, and they might not get to it, same day. It might take them a day or two to review and respond, and then it takes time to gather it, information to submit to the board and prep for any sort of hearings. So, regulatory issues, I think very early on, you're doing research. And then throughout your practice, I think it's really important to, keep in the loop with regulatory changes, right? States are, constantly changing healthcare laws. Those things happen on a very regular basis. They change daily, it feels like. So, staying involved with, someone like the American IV Association or any other groups that are going to share, when legislation is changing. That's another way to kind of spot early on, regulatory liability issues. If something's going to change in how you practice or operate, you see it. Usually you're going to get at least 90 days notice before that changes, sometimes a lot longer. And once that happens, you're going to want to find out what you need to do to comply, whether it be, additional licensure, change in licensure, or otherwise, to make sure that you address it by preventing it, meaning you're doing the right thing. The last few things I want to talk about will be some simple tools to, I think, address this, to address these issues, to audit your operations, et cetera. It always helps to have, I think, an outside party, audit, meaning whether it's a lawyer or it's a consultant or otherwise. Have them go through your system, have them go through your process and your practice to see how you operate and see if there are issues that might arise, that leave you open to exposure, whether it be from an employee standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, or from a patient standpoint. I think best thing you can do is on an annual basis, work on your business, look at it, go through your patient forms, go through, all the services you offer, see if those forms really match what you're doing, and then see if it's how you're actually operating, right? Talk to your staff. Are we doing this when it comes to patient payment authorization? Are we taking credit cards? Are we getting, authorization to charge their credit card, signed? You might even want to look through a small percentage of patient records to make sure that you're not missing, signed documents, right? Or when was the last time they signed a patient policy or consent? 3 years ago? Probably good to have them sign, again, just to make sure they're signing the latest version of it and that you have everybody signed. From an employee standpoint, check-ins with your employees, I think, are important, but you also want to check in with other staff and just say, hey, how are things working? How's the front desk, assisting with, the back office clinical staff, or vice versa? What are our providers doing that's, making more work for up front? I think you want to make sure that you understand how each of your employees and each of their positions operates. So if there's an issue, you can address it, you can spot it and address it. And it's not going to be something that catches you off guard. And then lastly, we talked about kind of protocols and plans of action. I think this is really most important, is to have, SOP, standard operating procedures for different issues. It can be broadly for employment stuff, broadly for patient stuff, broadly for regulatory stuff. Making sure that you have systems in place to identify issues, address those issues, document those issues, and fix those issues. And going forward, you want to have a plan of how you're fixing that. Why? Because especially from a regulatory standpoint, if you're not remediating the issue, then you're basically still committing it in the eyes of regulators. So if something's happened, you want to have a plan for it, enact that plan, document it, and keep records, right? In this world, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And generally, you want to have those things written down so you can make sure that you absolutely protect yourself, protect your business, whoever it is, your employees, your patients, and do things the right way. So with that, I don't know that the chat is open or working, but if it is and anyone has any questions, I'll hang for a few minutes to see if anything can come through. If it doesn't, then again, send any questions you have to support@americaniv.com, and those will get to me so we can answer them. And that way we can share a little bit more information and talk about more specifics. But wanted to make sure we got you some, general guidelines and ideas of how to identify these issues, how to address them. Ultimately, I think there's paperwork that can be done to help prevent and address a lot of these issues. Some of it is just simply how you operate as a business owner, and how you respond to things. And in all cases, I think addressing them in a focused manner with documentation, and if you can have other people involved just to witness it, always good. You want to make sure you document to the best extent possible, because again, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And it's going to be a lot easier to, defend your position if you have things in writing, signed, etc. So with that, I'll hang for a few just to see if any questions do come through. But again, if not, send those over to support@americaniv.com, and we will get those questions, and I'll get those answered, and we'll send them back over. And if you have any questions, I know Jennifer is still around, but I will be speaking at the two-day IV Hydration Business Academy in Fort Lauderdale. I'll be there on the 27th. I know there's a great lineup of other professionals that are going to be sharing a lot of good information there. Check out the website. We're constantly, filtering in, new information and content for the American IV